All set.
Great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ann Dolin, and today we're talking about the changing landscape of college admissions, not just this year, but also the impact of COVID on admissions beyond this year for our younger students, the freshmen and the sophomores. So, a lot has changed. In fact, I've never seen a time where there has been so much change in admissions and testing than in the last year and a half. I've had educational connections for 23 years. And during that time, we've helped thousands of kids prepare for the SAT and the ACT. But this year and last year are different than any others. So in the past, actually, I've given this workshop lots and lots of times, and I would often start with this slide, the admissions factors that determined basically whether a student would get into a college or not. And this is actually a survey done of admissions personnel in universities across the country. And they were asked, what is important to you in admissions decisions? Like, what makes you accept a student and not? And this is actually from 2 years ago. And I want to share this with you to show you how much things have changed. So when interviewed, admissions folks said there were 3 top considerations. One is grades in college prep courses. So not really grades in your marketing class, your PE class, or some other non-core class, but your grades in math, science, English, history, and a foreign language. Those are considered college prep classes. Second, the strength of your curriculum. That means how many, if you had the opportunity, advanced classes did you take to prepare you for college? And these would be AP, IB, or dual enrollment courses. And then lastly, your test scores on either the SAT or the ACT. So it was these 3 factors that were primary drivers in decisions. And you can see that all the other things were kind of important, but not nearly as important as these 3 factors. These 3 factors really got you in the door, especially in very competitive schools. The other things kind of mattered, not so much. Recommendations, essays, demonstrated interest. But now things have changed a lot. And the one thing that's very different now is the testing situation. So today I'm going to focus a lot on how to help your child stand out when it comes to college admissions, and specifically the role of the SAT and ACT in decision making. So let's talk about those test scores, the SAT and the ACT. First, the requirements now really vary by college. And the reason is that when COVID hit, colleges said, you know what, it's really not fair that in some areas of the country, the kids couldn't take the test. Their tests were canceled. Even though they prepared and they wanted to sit for a test, they couldn't because they just didn't have the opportunity. It's not really fair if a student from Vienna, Virginia didn't have the opportunity, but a kid from Des Moines, Iowa did. So for that reason, in the height of COVID, when so many tests were canceled, schools said, you know what, we're not going to look at this. It's just not going to be a big factor. However, some schools still did, but that view of, you know what, we're not going to consider this quite as much became a greater movement. It was always a movement before, but COVID really accelerated how much admissions departments use test scores in their decisions. So now schools will fall under one of 3 categories. One is some schools, and there's not a lot out there, they are requiring tests. They're saying, you know what, right now, tests are open and kids can really sit for tests. So they want to see tests. Most schools, however, are test optional. That means if you submit a test, they may look at it in their decisions. And actually, we'll talk about this a little bit later. It can be a big factor, especially if you're kind of right on the edge. Some schools will, for example, not consider tests, but in the last round of decision making, they will consider them, but they're still test optional. And in some schools are test blind, and that means that they don't look at tests at all. Even if you submit it, they won't even look at it. They don't really care because they believe that really the best indicator of whether you're going to do well in college is your grades. And that's generally true. So you can see that it does vary by college. However, the question that most students ask, especially given the vast majority of colleges are test optional right now, is, could a test help me? And the answer is yes, a test can help you. Especially if your grades you're applying to a super competitive college, for example, or if your grades are good, but they're not great and you have a solid test score. So let's talk a little bit about, will you need to submit a test? Here's the answer if you live in the state of Virginia, which many families we work with do. And I will tell you that Virginia Tech is the last college to come online as test optional. They were requiring tests up until a couple of months ago. UVA announced just before Virginia Tech that they were going test optional. William and Mary announced last year they're doing a 3-year test optional pilot to see if it makes a difference in how kids do in college. JMU, they've been test optional for about 3 years. And George Mason was actually one of the first schools in our area to go test optional. At George Mason, if you want to apply to a specific school, like School of Engineering, you do need a test. So be careful. Even if schools say test optional, if you're applying to a specific, usually math-based school, they may still want to see a test score. And a lot of schools for merit aid will also want to see a test score. So that's another time when test scores can be important. And then Christopher Newport, definitely test optional. VCU, they're optional, but it's definitely recommended. I remember when my youngest son, who's a freshman in college now, applied to schools. It was funny because VCU said test optional, but recommended, and they really hounded him to turn in his test scores. I don't even know why he didn't submit the test score to VCU because he did all the other ones because he had a good score. But they really wanted it. And so you'll find that it does vary by school, but in Virginia right now, and this could change next year, we don't know. So if you have a freshman or a sophomore, this could change, but right now for current juniors, we are in a test optional environment. So here's what we're looking at. Because so many schools are test optional, what happened is that kids that may not have been great test takers in the past are throwing their hats in the ring to competitive schools, and they're saying, hey, what, grades are really good, and now that a test score doesn't matter and my test score is not that great, I'm just going to apply anyways. So for that reason, there are top schools, not all schools, but the flagship schools are reporting lots more applications than ever before. So what we're seeing is at UVA, for example, last year they received 48,000 applications for 3,800 slots. And that doesn't mean that, they're only taking 3,800 kids, because they're actually going to take more, or they're going to accept more because their yield will vary. But it just shows you, oh my gosh, they're getting a ton of applications. However, on the flip side, JMU reported that they got 10% fewer applications. So it's really the top tier schools that are getting flooded. NYU, for example, they got over 100,000 applications for 6,500 slots. Colgate, last year, their apps were up over 100%. So it's huge when we think of these competitive colleges, that they still have the same amount of spaces, but they're getting a lot more applications. So if your child's interested in applying to a top tier college, the question is, how do you help your child stand out? So when it comes to testing, the first step that you want to think about is to take a practice test. And that means late your sophomore year. So if you're a sophomore, this is a good time, or this summer or early in your junior year, you want to take a practice test. And a practice test is not on your record. It's just for your information. This is a retired test. We offer these in the community most Saturdays. Kids roll out of bed, they're online with a live proctor. And kids can take a practice test. And the reason I find this helpful is actually twofold. One, to determine which test is best for you. Is it the SAT or is it the ACT? About a third of kids definitely test better on one than the other. And Every college in the country takes both tests. It does not matter which score you submit, but my recommendation is determine early on which test is best for you, which one you're naturally going to score best on, and go with that test. 2/3 of kids, it's a toss up. And so we ask them, which test are you most comfortable with? And that's the one they'll prepare for. But it really takes up a lot of time, a lot of effort, and some money if you're prepping for both tests when that's honestly not necessary. Just pick one and go for that. Right now, we're finding that there are not cancellations like there used to be. We don't expect going forward that there's going to be a ton of COVID related cancellations like there were a year ago. So a good strategy is to be selective in your time and your effort. You want to find the best test, but also this provides you a baseline score. So you can take a practice SAT, you can take a practice, you can take a practice ACT. We'll put them into a concordance table and we'll tell you this test is best for you, or you make that decision. But this also gives you a baseline score. And a baseline score is really helpful because a baseline score tells you, you know what, you might need a lot of time to get ready for this test based on your initial score. Or, wow, you're already scoring really, really well. You know what? You probably don't need that much preparation before you take your first test. Maybe you can get all of this test taking out of the way because you're already a really good test taker. And then early in your junior year, you can bump it out and you don't have to worry about it the rest of the year. But not every student is in that boat. What I found is that most kids do need some improvement. So they want to have that time to prepare. But this step of taking a practice test, an SAT and an ACT, determine what's best early on is really helpful and it's far less stressful. If you want a list of where to find these tests that we offer, you can text 55444 and just type in the word college and we'll send you follow-up information to this webinar, and it has listed all of the upcoming tests that kids can take. All right, so here's the next question I often hear from kids and parents. What is a good score? And honestly, a good score is relative based on where you want to go to college, what schools you have on your list, because a good score at one school may not be such a good score at another school. So what you want to do is go to the school's website. So you can go to, for example, Virginia Tech, and you can look at, for last year, what was the mid-range of students that went to Virginia Tech, or even the year before. And you can see what range of test scores their kids fell into. So here's an example for William and Mary from a couple of years ago. At William and Mary, the mid 50th percentile range on the SAT reading was 660 to 740. We'll talk a little bit more about these numbers in a second. Math was 660 to 770, and ACT was between 30 and 34. So when you sit to take a test and you, let's say you really want to go to William and Mary, it's been on your list for a gazillion years, you just love it, maybe your brother went there, whatever, it's high on the list. Maybe you even decide you want to apply early decision to William and Mary, which they have, and you're sitting at a 27. That is going to tell you if you want to submit a score that you're going to need to work pretty hard to get into that range, ideally the upper end of that range. But I wouldn't be submitting a score. It's not going to help your application. If you're sitting at that 27, you don't want to submit that to William and Mary because that's not what is in their range, and it's not really going to help your application. So again, you want to aim towards the higher end of their range. All right, so let's dive deep into the SAT and the ACT because they're actually pretty different. So the SAT is considered a power test. There are actually fewer questions on the SAT than the ACT, but they're a lot worrier. And the difficulty is that it requires a lot of critical thinking and analysis. And sometimes you'll look at the question and say, oh my gosh, what are they asking me? What does this mean? You have to kind of think deeply about what they're asking you to do. There's a narrower scope of skills, but actually the math on the SAT is not quite as advanced only by a few questions though, whereas the ACT has a few that are a little bit harder. But the difficulty on the SAT and why it's called a power test is in the interpretation and the analysis. Now, on the other hand, the ACT is considered to be a speed test. You have to go at a pretty fast pace in order to get through every question on every section. So there are more questions, but they are shorter, less wordy questions, and they're more straightforward. They're kind of more student friendly. So a lot of times kids will say to us, oh, when they take both tests, I actually like the questions on the ACT. They feel more like school. Other kids will say, you know what, that was too fast for me. I like the timing on the SAT better. I just felt more comfortable for my pace. Again, there's a broader scope of skills on the ACT, and the difficulty is in the pacing. However, if your child has a 504 or an IEP and they're going to get accommodations of extra time, in general, the ACT is the better test to go with because, again, if you don't have that obstacle of timing, the questions might be more straightforward and better for your child. So most students that have extra time and accommodation go for the ACT. All right, so the SAT, it has two sections. It has math, and there's actually a calculator section and a no calculator section worth 800 points. And then there's a part called evidence-based reading and writing, which is worth 800 points. The total point calculation is 1,600 points for a perfect score, and it's about 3 hours. Whereas the ACT is really different. It has 4 sections. It has math, it has reading, it has writing, which is very similar to the SAT. It's grammar. It's not a free write anymore. The essays are gone. And it has science. And you can get a total of 36 points on your 4 sections. And that's a perfect score, 36 points. And it's just a little bit shorter, but still a very long test. So here's what I would recommend if you want to take some practice tests and then take some tests because you want to see what your score is going to be. You can decide later whether you want to submit it or not. But it's our recommendation that you take the test and take a look at your score because it can help your application. And quite honestly, it's likely that some of the schools on your list, even if you're not applying, there are a lot of competitive schools, you may have a couple of these schools where your test should help. So for that reason, we encourage kids to take it. So you want to pick 2 dates your junior year. This is a little bit outdated actually, but this was, I did this last month. So you're going to pick an April day, for example, and a June and July date, 2 dates. For the SAT, you're going to pick 2 dates again. Maybe you pick a May date or a June and August date. The reason you want to pick 2 dates your junior year is because now you have a plan. Now you know you're going to take it once. You're going to look at your score after about 2 weeks when you get your score back. You're going to prepare for the parts that you didn't do well, and you're going to take it again. And that's a way better strategy than just kind of winging it and trying to figure it out as you go. Statistically speaking, and I think this is going to be so true right now because kids, at least in our area, have not been in school in the last year, most of last year. And I would argue have not had the same degree of instruction as they have had when they're sitting in a classroom. The best scores are the spring of a student's junior year. So unless you're already a high scorer, the vast majority of kids are going to score best the spring of their junior year because they've had more curriculum under their belts. So as sophomores, for example, approach their junior year, although they could take the test and be done with it in the fall, it's likely that their best score is actually going to be the spring of their junior year. So even if you want to take this test early just to be done with it, I'd say maybe take it twice in the fall if you really don't want to take it in the spring, but then also consider taking it in the spring because you could get a better score then. And the reason is actually because you're older, you're more mature, and you have more curriculum under your belt. And if you're preparing for the test, you have more time to prepare as well. So plan to take a test 2 to 3 times. Anything more than that is likely going to be, you're going to see diminishing returns. And get help with your testing plan. So you might find that, you know what, I'm not sure when to take it. I really don't know about these baseline scores. We can help you with that. It's a totally free service we offer to the community. There's no obligation. Our test prep manager is Karen McGinnis, and she's amazing. She can help you sign up for a test, take a look at your child's baseline scores, and help you decide based on your child's personal situation. For example, the math that they're in, their extracurricular busyness, all of the factors that go along in real life, when they're going to be best to take the test, and then which 2 test dates should they pick and should they pair together. So there's really 4 ways kids can prepare. They can buy a book, just go to Barnes and Noble, get a book, and practice independently. And the reason a paper and pencil book is perfectly fine is because the test is still paper and pencil right now. They can practice online. There's tons of free resources. Naviance is, many kids in the public school system have access to Naviance, which is amazingly helpful, by the way. If you haven't been to Naviance with your child, it's really great because you can see from past years which kids have gotten into the schools that your child is looking to go to. So you can see their GPA, you can see their test scores, which kids were admitted, waitlisted, denied. It's really powerful. Naviance offers free online practice. You can also take a group class. Right now, a lot of those are still online, or you could have one-to-one instruction with a tutor, which is what we do. I'm personally partial to it. I find that it's probably the most helpful because it's completely individualized to your child. Everybody is going to be working on something that's different. And that's because, you know, sometimes kids need help with content, sometimes strategies. Some are good in geometry, some are good in algebra, some need help with strategies like working backwards. So what everybody does is just a little bit different, and it's totally customized for the child. So the other thing I would say is, regardless of the way your child is going to prepare, they should not cram. Don't tie your child up for one of these cram sessions where it's a weekend before the test. We used to do those actually years ago, and they do not help. We did not see the return in terms of scores. So you want to make sure your kids are spacing it out over time. So if they need help, usually 3 months out is a good time in weekly sessions, and they practice on their homework in between a little bit. And that really helps prime their brain. It helps them remember the strategies because they're doing it over time. So why does all of this matter? Well, first of all, a small increase in a test, especially to a competitive school, can make a big difference. And there are certain things that you can control, and there are certain things, like when you're a junior, that you can't control. You know, you can control essays. Those are hugely important right now. Essays are really powerful because they can help you to stand out as an applicant. Before, they were kind of important, but if your essay wasn't great, but your test scores and your grades were, depending on the school, it wasn't a big deal. Now, essays are supremely important. So I would recommend definitely getting help for your child with essays, unless they're super self-motivated, because they matter a lot. Other things you can control, obviously, test scores. These can still be really important, but you can't control your grades from your freshman year. It's over. Let's move on. It's okay. You can control other things. But what I would recommend is that kids start early on all of this stuff, especially their essays. Aim for applying to schools by November 1st. That's when early action and early decision applications are due. That way, you still have time to work hard on your senior year grades, because your senior year grades still count, and they really count if you're waitlisted. If you're waitlisted, which is super common now, like the wait list is used even more than before, especially at competitive schools. If you're waitlisted and your grades your senior year are really, really strong, it can help your application. So you don't want to be slaving over essays, in September and October when you could have gotten the majority of this stuff done over the summer. So I'd love to go to Q&A. Allison, are people able to unmute themselves and ask questions, or should I go to the chat?
There's a Q&A feature, actually, if people would like to put their questions in that.
Okay, great. Yes, if you want to put your questions in the Q&A right now, I will be happy to answer them. So here's my contact information. If you have questions along the way, I can be reached at any time. Again, my name is Ann Dolin. My number is 703-593-8282. And my email is ann@ectutoring. And feel free to ask anything about where, what we're seeing, what schools are doing. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. All right, so let's go to the Q&A. So do most colleges ignore freshman grades? Certainly colleges look for an upward trajectory. That means that if you can show improvement, they may not look so much at your freshman grades. If they see that, oh, your sophomore year was better and your junior year is really great, that means your senior year is probably going to be good too. And you're on a roll and you're going to do well at their college. But I would say at competitive colleges, they still do look at freshman grades. But at less competitive colleges, they may be more likely to say, you know what, don't worry about it. Everybody shows improvement, and that's what we're looking to see. So they don't count towards the overall GPA, and the answer is they do. So every high school course can count in your GPA. But the thing about GPAs is that colleges don't look as much at GPAs anymore. And here's the reason, because schools weight grades differently than they used to. Schools weight grades in different ways. So for example, Montgomery County weighs AP courses differently than Fairfax weighs AP courses. And so somebody can get a 4.0 in one school district and a 4.2 in another one, even though they've gotten the exact same grades, and it doesn't seem fair. So for that reason, schools will really look at your grades, again, in those college prep classes that we talked about, the strength of your curriculum, but they may not look at your GPA. If they do look at your GPA, they're going to look at it from those core classes, and they're going to look at it compared to other people in your school. And that's key, because admissions folks are familiar with your school, unless you go to a super small school where they've never seen an application from your school, which is unlikely. So schools know what the quartiles are like in that school. They're used to reading applications in that school, and they're really comparing you to other students in that school. And so for that reason, they're not really comparing GPAs across school districts, but they may look at the GPA or your grades in that school. Yes. So somebody says, I've heard that the essay portion of the SAT will be removed. It already has been removed. So you do not have to take the essay anymore. In fact, it's been completely eliminated, and schools are not looking at the SAT essay anymore. So it's not even part of it. Also, subject tests are on the wayside as well. And those used to be important to really top tier schools, but now the College Board, which produces the SAT and subject tests, have just eliminated them. So kids do not have to worry about taking the essay portion of the SAT or the ACT at this point. Do colleges see if a student has received accommodations for the SAT and the ACT? And the answer is no. That is not, they are not privy to that information because of the Disabilities Act. So colleges do not see if you've gotten extra time, they only see your score. However, they will see if your child has an IEP and you apply for extra help at school, they will see that your child has an IEP, but they do not know about accommodations. All right, another parent said, what do you think about preparing early and taking the SAT in the sophomore year? And unless your child is an amazing test taker, I do not think you're going to see your best score in the sophomore year. If your child's like on the ACT, they're already getting a 35, then shoot, fine, have them take it again the junior year, but sure, if you want to prepare the sophomore year. I personally don't see an advantage of that because kids tend to not be ready. And again, statistically speaking, they're going to perform best that spring of their junior year. So, another option might be if you're worried about like the crush of work the junior year, you could always prepare the summer before the junior year. And in the fall of the junior year a little bit and sit for it the junior year. But I wouldn't spend an inordinate amount of time early on. Sometimes we get parents that call when their child's a freshman and they'll have their child take a baseline score and they're upset about their score and it's upsetting to the student. And it's really not a good indicator of how they're going to do later on. So it could be that they're working on skills that they're just going to kind of naturally acquire. All right. My 11th grader is paralyzed by the whole prospect of college applications. How do I motivate him? I hear what you're saying, Adrienne. It's so hard for kids. And I tell you, the reason is that college applications are very different than when we apply to college. It used to be that, you filled out the application, you put in, some short essay and sent it along. But now, in an effort to make things easier for kids, we have like the Common App, and the Common App in the Coalition app, for example, we're supposed to make it easier, and that kids would just fill out one application and would go to lots of schools. But what happened is that schools say, oh, actually, great, send me your Common App essay. But you know what? I have these other essays that are really unique to my school that I want you to do. So before you know it, if your child's applying to 9 schools, they could have 18 essays to write, no joke. And it's like so overwhelming and paralyzing to kids. They don't even want to get started. And for that reason, we saw this as an issue with our kids for years. And so about 3 years ago, we started a college application coaching service where we help kids really kind of like be the executive functions behind their application. We help them determine, okay, let's look at the schools you're going to apply, and then let's figure out what you need to do for each school, what essays are required, and we help them get their Common App essay done, or whatever it is, the Coalition app, all the supplemental apps, and be able to keep organized and keep on track so that they're generally getting everything done over the summer, and then they can press send or submit by November 1st at the latest. So if your child's paralyzed and he or she will not work with you, I would totally outsource it. It's not a lot of money compared to really the personal satisfaction you'll see, and that your child is able to get all this done and feels good, that they're able to, check it off and get everything done by November. All right. I hear a lot of students deferred entry due to COVID. Is this likely to make things more difficult for 2022 entrants as deferring students can take up places? Yeah, I was actually, I do a lot of volunteering for JMU, and I used to work with the admissions department, but now everything's like paused because there's no more college fairs, that type of thing. But I was on a call the other night and that came up, and they talked about that. And honestly, a lot of people schools are saying we're just not sure right now. So although, many students did defer, I don't think it's going to be that significant, that it's going to wildly affect the outcomes for our students. I think what's going to affect them most is the schools that they're applying to. So if you're applying to, again, flagship schools like Michigan or UNC, it's going to be really, really hard to gain entry just because of the volume of applications. So I was talking to a student who he applied to a bunch of Ivy Leagues, like his safety schools were Duke and Chapel Hill, which I strongly urge that he had other schools on his list, but he was confident and he didn't get into any of the top tier schools. And he's really, really upset over it. And it's not that he's not a great student. It's just that, he needed to have a more balanced list. So that's what I would encourage, is that kids' lists are super balanced this coming year. Do you think it's really best not to submit test scores if you can't get it to the median range? I heard most accepted students still submitted scores, even when optional. And the answer is most kids so last year, 70% of kids applying test optional submitted a score. So when you hear test optional, you think nobody's submitting a score. That's not true. You're right. Most accepted students are submitting a score. So you do not want to submit a score if it's not going to help your application. I would not do that. I would still only submit it if you're going to be in range or you're close to the range. If you're like really off, it will not help your application because your grades are going to be a better indicator of how you're going to be doing at college. And also your essay, your counselor recommendation. So some schools like Marshall High School, for example, they do a really good job of this, where they have this questionnaire for kids. It's really detailed. The kids put everything their counselor needs to know about them. So their counselor can write a really great letter of recommendation. If your counselor doesn't know you, or if you haven't been in school in a while, you need to find inroads so that your counselor can really write a strong letter for you, because those things mean a lot, and it's going to mean more than submitting a subpar test score. Okay, how about ranking in their class? Does that matter? And yes, depending on the school and how they keep the ranking, it is true. People that read, the people that are reading specific schools will know about your class ranking and may look at your class ranking too. Not every school keeps a ranking. Some private schools don't, for example, but it can be an indicator. If students take the SAT and ACT multiple times, do schools see all the scores? And the answer is you control your scores. So it used to be, I remember when my oldest son, who's 23, applied to college. He applied to 9 schools, and pretty much every school, they asked to see every test score. He took it 3 times, twice he did well, once he didn't. He had to submit everything. He did not own his data. Now you own your data, so you only submit what you want. The difference, however, is that now the ACT super scores everything. And a lot of kids are looking more favorably at the ACT right now, because if you take it twice, they're going to cherry pick your best scores, your best math, your best science, your best reading. And they're going to just report that one total best score. So they super score it for you automatically. And that's what colleges base their decision on. And sometimes kids say, oh my gosh, I'm only applying to schools that will super score my ACT. but everybody's at the same boat. Everybody's test is super scored. So the answer is they do see it. For the ACT, they do see everything, but it's super scored. The SAT, they only see what you submit. All right, is it better for a student to get a B in honors or an A in a regular class? And the answer is, what I found is that schools, colleges, they kind of look at honors favorably, and definitely more than a regular class. So I would say a B in honors rather than an A in regular. It shows that you're challenging yourself is better. However, when looking at more competitive schools and AP, IB, or dual enrollment classes, the question I also get is it better to take an AP class or an honors class? Is it better to get the B in the AP or the A in the honors? And the answer is it's better to get the B in the AP. because that's what schools are looking for. They're looking for you to challenge yourself. Even if you get a slightly lower grade, they see that you cared. And if you get a good score on your AP exam, you should submit that as well. That can help your applications. Any recommendations for helping students stand out other than test scores with the deluge of applications? And yeah, so what I found in working with lots of kids, and even though my company does not help students pick schools, we do help them through the whole application process, and we also see where they get in and where they don't. And the ones that have shown a pattern, meaning they've taken a role, like they found what they love to do. For example, maybe they apply to the School of Business, and over the summer they take a basic business class at Nova, or maybe they start their small business and they have a little website, or they have a Facebook page for their business, or they've incorporated, like they've done something with their business. They can show marketing materials. They've done something to show over time, not just their junior year, they all of a sudden decided to do this, but they've shown that I like business. My sophomore year, I did this. Over the summer, I did this. My junior year, I did this. It shows that you care deeply about something, that you're committed, and that's the path that you want to take. That can help kids stand out. And so that's why summers are really important. We don't want our kids sitting in the basement playing Xbox. We want them doing something that's meaningful. And even if your child doesn't know what they want to do, but they're a good soccer player, they can take leadership roles. They can volunteer at a soccer camp. They can get a paid soccer camp job. They can take a leadership role on their soccer team. These are all things that show that they care deeply about something and that they've risen to the top and taken a leadership role. And that's how kids can stand out, especially if they're going to apply to a specific school and they're declaring, they're not really declaring their major, but they're applying to a specific program. That can really help them stand out. And do you offer assistance with college application? And the answer is yes. It's a lot of what we do. We generally start about right now, sometimes in May, June, but we'll work closely with kids that are juniors over the summer to make sure that they're able to get everything done and write really great essays that are also technically correct, and that they've hit all their deadlines to get everything done on time. Yeah. Let's see. I don't think we have any other questions, Allison, and we're right on time. It's 4:14. I thank you all so much for being here. I would love to ask you before you go, if you don't mind. I'm curious if you don't mind throwing in the chat. What was helpful to you? What was helpful, or what did you learn from this presentation? I'm just curious. That would really help me. So go to the chat, and then instead of picking all panelists, go to all panelists and attendees and just type in one thing that you learned. And I'll read those out because often we learn things from other people. So thank you so much for doing that before you exit today. Again, it was a pleasure to speak to all of you. I hope you found it was helpful. And if you need anything, feel free to reach out and at ectutoring.com. Thank you so much. Let's see what we got in the chat. The ACT positive. Thank you. Yes. I am partial to the ACT. I like it, even though we kind of grew up with the SAT in the Mid-Atlantic. I find that a lot of kids really like the ACT, and they tend to do a bit better on it too. All right, anything else coming through? College's preferences, use of SAT and ACT. We've been focused on GPA. I just realized there are other things. The difference between the SAT and the ACT. Great. I'm so glad that that was helpful. The changing focus of admissions, also differences in admissions tests, the college preferences. Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you all so much for attending. It was a pleasure to speak to you. I wish you all the very best for the remainder of the school year. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.